Welcome back. This is video 2 on navigating life after discovering infidelity. One, I would love some feedback. Yesterday's was a scripted video and today's is ad lib, and I'd love to hear what you think of the two versions. This is new for me. So before you can begin making decisions after you've experienced or discovered that infidelity has occurred in your relationship, you need to connect with yourself. You need to know and remember and re-experience, who am I? Who is the soul that lives inside this skin? And so I have a tip or an activity for you to do. Write these things down so that you can remember what I'm guiding you through in terms of a process. And of course, feel free to come back and look at the video for reminders on what I'm suggesting you do. We're going to start with making two lists. Sometimes it's helpful to put these words on a sticky note on the wall instead of on a list on a piece of paper. Kind of depends on how visual and kinesthetic you are in processing what might be better. I prefer sticky notes on a wall, but list making is absolutely acceptable as well. And maybe even you would prefer to do it on 3x5 cards, index cards, so that you could look at them one at a time. The first list is going to be the words that you hope people use to describe you. Whether you think they're true or untrue is irrelevant, and these words can be descriptive of qualities that you possess internally, such as temperament, personality, character, values, or it can be external characteristics such as physical attributes, physical appearance, the roles that you fulfill, the skills and tasks that you perform. And the second list is going to be the words that you are afraid people use to describe you. And again, it could be true or untrue, that's irrelevant, and they can be internal or external based on the same description as before. And I want you to make this list first, or these two lists first, thinking specifically about how you hope your spouse sees you and how you're afraid your spouse might see you. And then go on and add to those lists thinking larger, thinking more people in your circle of life and how you would hope and be afraid they would see you. Once you have made that list or those lists, I want you to put a dot on every word that you believe is true of you. It doesn't have to be 100% true, but if you think the word is more true than not true, if it's more true of you, it gets a dot. And this is your perception of yourself, no one else's perception. So we're switching gears here. We started making the list by thinking of what others think. Now we're going to mark the list according to what we believe about ourselves. Once you've put a dot on the items that you think are mostly true and descriptive of you, you're going to go back to the list and put an X on the items that you think are mostly not true of you. And I want you to work really hard to pick one or the other. Sometimes we're really torn, and in those cases, I would say, if you have a couple items you just feel is really 50-50, you can put a dot and an X. And sometimes we look at a word and we think, well, in this context, it's really true, but in this context, it's totally not true. And in those cases, you could put a little word. So you might put a dot and say work and an X and say home or family. So you could clarify what the dot or the X mean. But as much as possible, I want you to simplify it and just put one dot or one X for each word. Once you've done that, I want you to just kind of look at the list and notice, what does it feel like to see these words and how I consider others might see me and how I actually see myself. Then I want you to put an arrow to the right by any word that you think is in transition to becoming more like you, and an arrow to the left for any word that you think is in transition, that you're becoming less like that word. And it could be that you're becoming more or less like that word because you're working on it, you're trying to change it, or it could be that you're becoming more or less like that word just kind of Oh, I don't know why it's different. It's just different. And so don't worry about why. Just think, is this something that I'm in transition with, becoming more or less like? Arrow to the right for more like, arrow to the left for less like. And there may only be a couple words. You do not necessarily have an arrow for every word. You don't necessarily have to feel like you're changing every single thing on there. That would be overwhelming. And now the last piece is to look at the words. First, start with the list. The words you hope people would see you as these words. And I want you to think, is there any word on there that's really not all that important to me? Like, I'm not super invested in being this word, but if I'm not this word, others will judge me as not good enough. And that other person could be others in general, or it could be your spouse. But if others would judge me as not being good enough, and that's the reason I work to be like this word, then you put a diagonal line across from one corner to the next corner, so that you can still read the whole note, but the diagonal line is very obvious. Then you're going to look at the list of words that you are afraid people might think you are like. And I'm going to flip that question now. It's kind of a tongue twister question, so feel free to re-listen to this. So looking at the list of words that you hope people do not use to describe you, are there any of those words that you feel like, it's really not a big deal to me to be like this word, but if I am like this word, others will judge me as not good enough. So I feel like I have to not be this word. I have to work at not being this thing. And if there's any words that fit in there, again, a diagonal line from one corner to the next, just so that that line is easy to see, but the note is still readable. Or not the note, the word is still readable. And if you've got them on sticky notes, they're going to go a diagonal across the note. If it's a list, you're just going to do a diagonal line next to the word, just like you would do the dot or the X next to the word. And that's about it for the list. Then what I want to say about the diagonal line is that's our hustle zone. We're really likely, when we get caught up in what others think and trying to be what we think they expect us to be, is when we are most likely to get out of alignment with our own values and integrity. And I think we're particularly at risk of that when we're in these situations of potential deep transition, very difficult realizations, and really difficult decisions that lie before us that have long-term impact. They're not just a little decision like, what do I get for lunch? This is a life-altering decision that you're making about how to respond to infidelity in your life. I don't want you to get too bogged down with this. The one thing I want you to do after you've done this is just notice how you are aware and worried about what others think. And we're going to come back to this in the next video. Until that video, I want you to just reflect and notice how do I get caught up in what others think of me, both positive and negative, and what do I do with that? How much do I let it stick, positive or negative, and how much do I let go of what others think, positive or negative, and to begin to cultivate a sense of awareness of how much you might be guided in your actions and choices and thoughts by what others might say or think. And that is it for today. Thank you for listening. I hope you find this helpful.